time for our weekly conversation with Toronto Mayor John Tory. So good morning, Mayor Tory. Thanks for joining us here. I notice that you're joining us from your condo rather than your office. And we know, of course, you've been in isolation for almost a week after that COVID-19 positive test. So first and foremost, how are you feeling? How are you doing?
Well, I feel fine, and I had, quite acute symptoms for sort of a day and a half last Thursday, Friday, and I just think that the fact I was triple vaccinated made a big difference between my ending up, having those symptoms go away fairly quickly and having to, serve out my isolation period here, but serving it out and feeling quite well versus, possibly ending up in the hospital. So I hate to use this as a commercial for, getting vaccinated, but I will, just because I think in my own case and in the case of many, many other people, getting vaccinated, especially for the third time, because we have very high numbers for first and second, but not as high for third. This is why you get the third vaccination, not so that you won't get it, although I think it'll stop many people from getting COVID, but because it means when you do get it, it will be much less severe and much less harmful to your own health. So I'm feeling much better. I'm ready to come back to work. My isolation period is technically over, but I'm just, as a matter of caution, taking an extra day or so to work from home so that we can be, considerate of the people that I work with and of the public, for that matter, that I interact with.
Right. Of course, we'd noticed, leading up to your positive test that you'd actually had a fairly busy schedule going to various public events, et cetera. I wonder if you can talk at all about the protocols that you'd been sort of undertaking prior to this, and then will that change at all, going forward based on, we realize how highly transmissible COVID is right now?
Well, I was wearing a mask a lot before, even though the requirements, as you know, went away by and large. I was wearing a mask. I was wearing a mask in the car because I felt the person who was often with me in the car, there were often more than one person, and those people don't have COVID right now, so maybe that was helpful. I think they were wearing masks too. I was wearing masks at all indoor events, and I was wearing masks outdoors because, the advice these days isn't, the law doesn't require people to wear a mask except, say, on the TTC and other very specific locations like long-term care. But the advice from Dr. Davila and Dr. Moore is wear a mask whenever you can. And I just don't understand all the controversy about this, because I think most people are comfortable with the notion that it helps them to stay healthy. So I will continue to wear a mask, and you're supposed to when you come back from this isolation for a few days. And I'll continue to do that for a period of time. And we'll continue to do all the other things that people have been asked to do, which is to sort of avoid these kind of crowd scenes unnecessarily. I mean, you have to be in crowd scenes sometimes, but mostly to wear a mask, wash your hands, and all the things we've been told for 2 years now. I know it gets boring, but it's still what the health people tell us is most effective to stop the spread of COVID.
All right. Okay. Well, listen, we're glad you're doing well, Mr. Mayor. And another person people I think around the city are glad is doing well is that woman who was shoved on the subway tracks a couple of days ago. CTV News spoke to her yesterday. She's in remarkable spirits. Her recovery is incredible, considering I'm sure you've seen that video of her getting effectively body checked, smashing her ribs on the rails, et cetera. It's sort of reinvigorated that talk about the idea of, barriers in the subway system, that kind of thing. First of all, just the idea that something like that happened on the TTC, your thoughts on that, and then that next step, the TTC said, they'd like to see barriers, but there's a cost barrier there too.
Yeah, well, in terms of the TTC, I mean, the very fact you can see that yellow strip so clearly, and that there's a lot of other sort of emergency measures and warnings about staying back from the platform. And I'm not by any means blaming this poor woman who is just minding her own business. But, there's a lot of safety precautions the TTC has taken to make sure people are safe on the TTC, and it is a very safe place to be. With respect to the question of the doors, that has been discussed for decades, long before I became mayor. And I think, to be quite frank, I think you have to be honest about these things. The obstacle comes from a debate that goes on between different groups of people as to whether they're spending $1.5 billion to put those doors in, which have some other benefits, by the way, in terms of helping to stop delays and this kind of thing, is something that is the right way to spend that $1.5 billion versus, say, expanding the transit system. And so the debate goes on. Some of the new construction that is happening, they put the doors in even in Toronto, not on the Ontario line, but some of the other extensions. But by and large, the notion of retrofitting the whole system at a cost of $1.5 billion has been something that hasn't gained a lot of traction with the public, I would say, so far, including them saying, no, that's something you must do with $1.5 billion of our money. I think most of them either don't have an opinion, or they would say we should use that money to expand the transit system. So it's a difficult call, because, of course, you don't want anybody to lose their life there.
Absolutely not. Let's stick on the rails because rail workers at Union Station this morning are now legally on strike. Potentially could be seeing some delays here. I realize you're not going to talk about the negotiations, et cetera, on that you're not involved in that. But I wonder if that worries you yet again. The city is trying to recover from this pandemic. We're trying to get more people to come downtown, and all of a sudden another hiccup here. I wonder if you're concerned that this may affect Toronto's pandemic recovery.
Well, it's a very good point, Nick, because I mean, what we're trying to do is get people back on transit, back on the GO system, because that's how they get downtown, and it's how we avoid as well having chaotic traffic. And so, obviously, what we would like to see is a settlement reached there as soon as possible with those workers. But I will also say that that's something we're not involved in. I would also say that in the meantime, especially because this is a matter that does involve some elements of safety, that hopefully, the supervisory and management workers can do those jobs and keep the trains moving. That's what we want to have happen.
Yeah, exactly. Keeping the trains moving, especially in the middle of the week, that's definitely what needs to happen. Okay, that does it for me, Mr. Mayor, but Jennifer's here now with our viewer questions this morning. Jen.
Hey, Nick.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Good morning. Mayor Tory, glad to hear that you are okay and that you are on the recovery. Our first question this morning comes from our viewer, Michelle, who wants to bring your attention to masking on the TDC. She writes in, if wearing a mask is mandatory on the TDC, why is it not being enforced? I take the TDC daily and at least 25% of the people are not wearing a mask and nobody is enforcing it despite the fact that case numbers are rising.
Well, it's a question of what the enforcement is, I'll say to Michelle. I spoke with Mr. O'Leary, the CEO of the TTC, about this just a couple of days ago. And the enforcement that's always been practice has been to spot people, because there's very active programs monitoring compliance, spot people in the stations where there are hotspots, and to give them a mask rather than, calling somebody to give them a ticket, and give them a mask and say, would you please put this on? That's what the requirement is. There is no question but that when the mask mandate came off in other areas, some people assumed that meant the mask mandate was off on the TTC, which it never was. So legally, you are still required to wear a mask on the TTC. So the TTC are very aware of the fact there was some diminished mask wearing after the rules were relaxed elsewhere. And so they kept on with the efforts of handing out free masks in places where they knew there was a hotspot of non-compliance. And so I think what you'll find based on the numbers that I've seen is that there was a dip down in compliance, and then that the compliance has come back up since people were reminded of the fact that they had to wear a mask, and since the TTC were engaged in the kind of compliance they always have, which is to hand out a mask and ask people to wear one when they see someone that isn't. And I've been on the subway quite a few times, not the past few days because I've been sick, but I've been on the subway quite a few times, and I must say the compliance that I've seen on the subway was way higher than 75% implied by Michelle's question. It was up like at 95. Almost everybody that I saw, in fact, was wearing a mask. And I think that by and large, people are complying.
Okay, that's interesting. Hopefully the answer satisfies Michelle. Next up, Mayor Tory, Carol has a beef about bicycles, writing in this email. Is the city ever going to license bicycle riders and make them ride on the roads instead of the sidewalks? I've been hit twice and almost hit many times. This is a big problem for pedestrians.
We have some complaints about this. I will say that on the question of licensing, one of the facts that was put in front of us, and we have many things we have to juggle at City Hall, and I do as mayor, which is that the cost of administering a licensing system is more than you could charge for the license. So in other words, if you charge $10, because if you charge $25 or $50, people would be potentially outraged at that, because we're trying to encourage people to use cycling as opposed to cars and so on. And so the cost of setting up a system to license people, would be more than the benefit of it. And so that's number one. Number two, as is the case with dog licensing, there are many people, even though it's a requirement, that just don't get their dogs licensed, and there would be many people who just wouldn't get a cycling license. So over time, the opting has been not to have such a system. But there are issues with cycling safety, just as there are with, with car drivers. And you see people going through red lights. I see it myself from cyclists from time to time. I think it's a minority who don't follow the rules. And I think the efforts we can make are really just to have the police, who have many things to do. But as they were out last week writing a lot of checks for people who were speeding, a lot of tickets rather for people who are speeding, I think we've got to make sure that on places where there are problems with riding on the sidewalk, it is absolutely positively forbidden to ride on the sidewalk. That's not safe for pedestrians, as the viewer has pointed out. So I'll have a discussion. I don't tell the police what to do in terms of enforcing the law, but I can certainly talk to them about keeping an eye on this as we get into the season where more and more people are cycling and walking.
Okay, yeah, unless you're a five-year-old or a 2-year-old, don't ride on the sidewalks. Okay, good clarification there. Next up, Mayor Tory, our viewer Will has a question on some advice about getting a stop sign put in. He doesn't say where, but he does write in. It's been a year now since my original request to have an always stop sign installed at an intersection near my house. I've emailed my counselor many times. I've emailed my MPP, and nothing I've tried seems to be making it happen. It's a no-brainer safety move. Kids get picked up for school at this intersection.
Well, I will just say, if Will understood, as I'm sure he probably does, the number of instances across the city where we're asked to put in stop signs or signals or crosswalks, and we can't put them everywhere just because then there are standards that are set as to where they're put in. Now, I'm not saying in this case I have any idea where the intersection is or what the standard is. I will say to him that if he wants to email me at mayor_Tory@toronto.ca and indicate he is the person that asked on CP24, I will have a look at the file and find out why it hasn't been put in. But it's not just that people are sitting there ignoring taxpayers. They should respond to the emails, but it's a matter that there are standards that are set in terms of where you put stop signs and where you put crosswalks that have been relaxed so that we can have more crosswalks and more stop signs in the interest of pedestrian and school safety, for example. But it is a process that we have to follow, because you can imagine if we just put a stop sign everywhere everybody wanted one, there might be one every 20 feet. And so I'm not saying that this is one where there shouldn't be one, but I am saying that there's a process, and I will check in on why that process is so slow and find out what the answer is for Will if he just gets in touch with me.
Okay, sounds good. Mayor John Tory, thank you for joining us, even though you're in isolation. Really appreciate your time and hope you get better soon. Take care.
Yeah, we're feeling good, Jennifer. Thanks a lot.
Okay, good.